everything they do. She just handled the topic around mass incarceration and did an incredible play with that, but has really run the gamut on so many of these really critical areas of representation and awareness. So those types of organizations as well, and those people, both of whom I named just women, but, as you mentioned as well, people of color, women, LGBTQ community that are just really making a mark here, and that it's remarkable. You don't have that in a lot of other, but certainly no other place I've lived. I have not seen that. I lived in Philly. I lived in New York. There's nothing like this type of involved, committed artist community who is so deeply entrenched in the good of the community as a whole.
Because one of the things we talked about on the show with other guests, I think we might have mentioned it with Reese Palmer, who was a singer when she was on, and definitely Nell and some of the other guests that we've had on, even Desan, is, in your opinion, how important is it for artists to be engaged in making social change and being part of the causes that are going around? It seems like they're very much involved here. But just in your opinion, how vital a role is that for us to have?
So I think, I'll give my personal opinion on it, because I don't want to voice this view and say this is what art should be, because I think art is valid as an end in and of itself, right? And I know no one would argue against that per se, but for me personally, and for where I am in my life and how far in age I am, me putting pen to paper is not enough. It's just not enough. I need to look at my life and say, okay, who am I serving? And how can I use my gifts to serve those individuals who have a need, an pressing need, right? So the art, it can be one channel of that, and I'll be very honest, I'm just kind of coming back around to making space for my art in my life. It's something that's been pretty dormant for a few years now. But what hasn't been is my work in working with women that have dealt with domestic violence, that have dealt with mental illness. I'm doing work on mentoring formerly incarcerated reentering folks. So that's the type of work that, we don't get on stage, get behind a mic. But for me, just kind of those one-on-one interactions, being able to share my experiences through some different groups that I work with, selfishly, it's incredibly rewarding, but I think it's also it's incumbent on me as an artist to take that step and to do that.
And as one who's went through abuse yourself, I'm sure that, and we alluded to it earlier during the opening conversation and everything, I'm sure that a lot of the stuff that was coming out, whether it was about Cosby or about Kavanaugh, was probably also striking home to you, because it was probably bringing back some of the memories of what you yourself had gone through in terms of one that had been, and I didn't even use that word, victimized, but I mean, because it put it in a context that I don't necessarily feel is a fair context to you, but I'm just saying, but as one who went through that, I'm sure that seeing all of this stuff, and in one case, the person having what I guess some people perceive as justice and Cosby now going to serve some time, but in the other case, the person getting ready to sit on the Supreme Court and make decisions about a lot of things that will impact people that you're trying to help.
Yeah, I think, we're in such a tipping point, right, in this country, and around I think the gender issue, with women having the opportunity to kind of drive some real change. And yeah, Kavanaugh is going to be sitting on the Supreme Court, but not quietly. And we're continuing to push. And there's something about that is so critical and so reassuring. But I do think to a certain extent it continues to obscure, as you bring up with Cosby, all the racial dynamics that have, you cannot separate sexual trauma and race in this country's history in any way, shape, or form. And I think there's a blindness to that and to that intersectionality within, the white folks I know and that I talk to, that there's just not an understanding of the history involved here. I'm not shocked by Kavanaugh. I haven't been shocked by a single thing that this administration has done. I think it's just being shocked is kind of a privilege, right? Like this is, maybe this is the first time that white folks and white men have been treated this way in America, but it certainly is not treatment that has been unknown to other major elements of our society, right? And this country was built on that. So I think now to sit around and feign shock and discomfort at everything that's going on is really a little disingenuous. But, sometimes you need this crisis moment. This is a crisis moment to really see where people stand and to hopefully drive change and lasting change and meaningful change. So that's my hope for this moment in history. That's what I'm working toward. I was relieved to, it's been 20 years essentially since sexual assault, and it didn't hurt. There was no trauma. There was no, not that, I'm not saying it shouldn't for anyone by any means, but being able to see that for myself, that's a healed thing, that was actually really, it was a moment of kind of relief and like, okay, that's not something I have to carry with me. Some other things I'm carrying with me right now, but that's one I can put down.
That's good that you can put that down. And, one of my favorite points, and, I find it interesting. I've actually dated across the umbrella, the rainbow umbrella and everything, but my dad has been in a long-time relationship with a Jewish American who has been classified by most people as a white woman. And then and I've had friends that have also dated across the racial lines and everything. And I know that one of the points that a lot of people were probably shocked the first time you did it, but I definitely understood where you were coming from, was the whole novel use for a white woman.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people probably were shocked.
So tell us a little bit about where that came from at that time that you wrote it, and maybe give us a little bit of that one as well.
So I actually wrote that poem after Jonathan Ferrell was murdered in Charlotte by a police officer who was never brought up on charges. And the thing I think that was 2013, the thing that stuck with me about that case in particular, if you may remember, this was a young man. He was a recent graduate, football player, engaged, just, someone that had his whole life in front of him, gone to a car wreck, and was knocking on a woman's door for help, and she called the cops, and the cops came, and Officer Carrick emptied, I think, 12 bullets into him. I was dating a man at the time, and we sat down and cried at the table, and he told me, how much he felt like he looked like him. And this was just kind of my poem about, I know it can kind of read as tongue-in-cheek, but it was really out of a moment of heartbreak and futility. And I think the futility anyone has who loves a black man in America, who loves a person of color, of, that this is a really perilous moment in America. And so that's kind of where this poem came out of. It's called A Novel Used for White Women. I'm thinking about renting out white women. More specifically, I'm thinking about renting white women to black men. Hear me out just a second. The thought occurred to me one midnight in that twilight between awake and asleep. I hear metal key and lock downstairs and smile because my boyfriend is home after working late, but then another male voice, aggressive, competes with my loves in the dark. I put the whole scene together in my mind. By the time I yank at the door that always sticks a single thought giving urgency to each of my movements, get him inside. The revealed scene is what I expect. Officer is all questions, his right hand resting on his revolver. What are you doing here, son? Face bolstered by weapon. What are you doing in my front yard, officer? Deeper bass emboldened by fuck you. I see the YouTube comments suggesting that his question was the antagonistic, get him inside. Get my white female body in between him and the most likely statistical source of his bodily injury, his powerful body that could hoist me from one side of the room to the next without even the smallest ungentlemanly heave of breath. But in this moment, a body turned a glow-in-the-dark target. A body that houses a mind as lethal as the cops' implied accusations. But America has always been more afraid of the black man's mind than his body, haven't we? That officer out front, armed to the nines, he could take down a body, but the mind stays outside of his grasp. We harass Professor Gates for breaking into his own home. Professor West is under arrest for standing up for his community. How far have we really come from black businessmen and publishers left dangling from trees, sickening stop signs of exactly how far a black man can come in America and how much ground will always be left gaping in front of him like a grave? So I'm thinking about renting out white women, because I believe if a white lady had gone for a walk with Mike or Eric, he might have made it home to have dinner with his family. I'm thinking we could even offer the more petite models as backpacks so that the family of Walter Scott and others similarly stricken would not need to endure insulting explanations about how their loved one charged at officers but somehow wound up with bullets in his back. So I would ask you, next time you see a black man and white woman walking hand in hand, consider the possibility that maybe it is true love, because we all know that love is blind, but American law enforcement is not, and so maybe, gutted of even his most basic rights to life and liberty, he's taken the advisable caution of using her white body as a shield.
So the book is called Songs from the Psych Ward. Now, what made you decide to publish this book at this particular time? And I believe you self-published it. Why did you go with the self-publishing route and everything?
Yeah, so it's just kind of coincidental. I had it in this year, 2018, I said I was going to release the book, and that was exactly how I put it. I needed to get it out of my body and into the world. It had become really kind of this anchor that I've been working on for 2 years, and just was having a really hard time getting rid of it. So I set myself kind of a deadline. March 1, I started submitting it to some different chapbook things, and didn't really have any intention of putting it into print form. The reason it is self-published and the reason that it did turn into a book was kind of a weird string of coincidence. I had one of my old physicians at UNC contacted me, a reporter from NPR, the San Francisco NPR affiliate, was coming out to do a report on postpartum mental health care, and UNC is it's sadly the only inpatient facility in the country that deals specifically with what they call prenatal and postpartum mental health issues. And so the reporter was coming out to see that, and then they want to talk to a patient. And so I was contacted about that. I had like a week and a half between when I was contacted and the interview, and so I was like, okay, well, let me get this printed up. I'll, kind of slip it to her as she's leaving. Maybe she can read it on the plane back. It turned into a 2-hour interview in a turned-off car in July in North Carolina. We were pouring sweat. It was like a purification ceremony of some kind, and I ended up reading like 5 or 6 poems with her, and just talking about kind of gnarliest parts of my experience and things I had never given voice to previously. And so I do think that